welcome to our presentation on Tokugawa, Japan. We hope you find this information helpful and enjoyable.
I'm Alexa.
I'm Megan.
I'm Noah.
I'm Jersey.
I'm Sydney.
Social classes during the Edo period. First was the emperor, and then there was the court and nobility, and also the shogun and the daimyo, which were the lords. There was the samurai, the shi, the farming peasants, the no, the artisans, which were the ko, the merchants, the sho, and sold and indentured servants, the eda and hinin. And society during the Edo period, or Tokugawa period in Japan, was ruled by strict customs and regulations intended to promote stability. Confucian ideas provided the foundation for a system of strict social prescriptions. At the top of the social order, although below the emperor, was the shogun, the daimyo, and the samurai, or the ruling class. The peasants lived in villages and produced agricultural goods. Increasing urbanization and rising consumerism created merchant and artisan classes in towns and cities. Social mobility during this period was highly limited, as wealth became concentrated outside of the samurai class. Conflicts between class arose, and the social order became increasingly challenged. Because the government was more focused on the morals of the merchants and the samurai, because the samurai were in order and they were more focused on bringing good and protecting people, they were higher up, even though they did not make very much money. Whereas merchants, they did not create anything, they sold things, and so morally they were not respected, and morally they were seen as wrong, and so they were at the bottom, even though they made most money, and sometimes made more than a samurai, and sometimes a samurai was only a little better off than a peasant. And so the four classes were what would stabilize the country, and this system was created off ideas of Confucianism that spread to Japan from China. And so the samurai functioned as the warrior class, and they constituted about 7 to 8% of the population, and they were paid a stipend from their lord, limiting their ties to the economic base. In addition, samurai could not own land, which would have given them income independent from their duty.
Before the Tokugawa shogunate was established, there was political disruption, and the central political authority had lost its effectiveness during the period of warring states, which was around 1467 to 1590. At the end of this time, many daimyo, or local warlords, became extremely powerful. Among these was Oda Nobunaga, a daimyo from the province Owari in central Honshu. He killed the last Ashikaga shogun in 1573 and brought about 1/3 of Japan under his control by using brutal military tactics. He was also the first daimyo to make extensive use of firearms, but he was assassinated in 1582. After that, his best general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, took his place. Hideyoshi was a very brilliant leader, but had unsuccessfully attempted to invade China and Korea. By the time he died, he only produced one heir, a son. 5 trusted allies swore to protect his son and the Toyotomi clan. Tokugawa Ieyasu, one of the 5 allies, turned on Hideyoshi. His forces eventually defeated Toyotomi, and he established a new shogunate in his name. Another war was fought, and Ieyasu completely destroyed the Toyotomi and their allies. After that, Tokugawa remained and maintained political authority for around 253 years.
One major part of Tokugawa politics were the state structures. The political structure of Tokugawa Japan was in a shogunate, a form of a dynasty for the lower governments that were under the official Tokugawa government, which was altogether called the Bakuan system. This was what caused the daimyos that had ruled before the system to go under with a form, although not technically a centralized government, to unify Japan and bring down daimyo power. Soon, laws were established in Tokugawa Japan as European influences started to come to Japan. Laws included executing any Japanese who had converted to Christianity and officially banning the religion in 1614. Along with this, Tokugawa leaders had set up the structures of castle towns, which is where local lords had gathered their warriors and headquarters in fortified castles, where samurais also took residence.
In Tokugawa, Japan, they had a variety of economic systems that helped them build a strong economy. The two main ones were their agricultural system and their merchant system. Now, their agricultural system was really important because it allowed for the basis of trade later on because of all the food that they were producing. So during the years of 1450 to 1600, the production increased by 70%, and a big part of that was their Tokugawa peace policies, which disarmed the peasants and local religious communities to put more people on the land. Now this in turn caused population growth. For example, in 1600, there were an estimated 12 to 18 million people living in Tokugawa, Japan, but by 1720 there was 31 million people. Now they did all of this through careful monitoring of cropping patterns and fertilizers and just knowledge of those things. And their policies, they supported land clearance and reclamation which allowed for a larger production of agricultural goods.
Relating back to the agricultural system, it caused a surplus of food which allowed an increase in population. The merchant class was able to grow, which in turn increased trade. An effect of the agricultural system was that a lot of laborers and supplies were needed as urbanization increased and the economy thrived. A lot of the things being traded were items being produced by the agrarian-based societies in Japan.
The merchant system was also really important, and during the time of the Tokugawa Empire, they saw a growth in the use of money, and they placed an emphasis on minting, and they standardized their currency and their coinage. They also had an effective transportation system, which allowed for the expansion of sea networks so that they could trade, but they only traded with their own people, so they only traded to the coast. It also saw a growth in internal market trade, which was also really important. And then the merchants, the interesting part was that there was an imbalance of power between the merchants and the samurais. So the merchants almost had the samurais at their mercy because the samurais were dependent on the merchants. And it also helped the merchants make a profit and gave them a symbolic leverage over the samurais.
Trade heavily benefited the merchant class, who became the most economically powerful, and it also negatively affected the samurai class. Merchants pushed inward to open new markets and trade networks throughout Japan. These market towns were connected by roads, which allowed an effect on local and national economy. Merchant trade began to call for specialty goods, and soon enough, currency, agricultural goods, and specialty goods were all being traded. The people of the samurai class got themselves into debt because they owed money to the merchants for the goods that they bought. Samurais had to trade their rice stipends for cash and were not allowed to engage in farming and commerce techniques according to the Tokugawa policy. So in conclusion, agricultural and merchant trade was the basis of Tokugawa Japan's economy.
There are many major developments in Tokugawa Japan over time. For example, in the 16th century, Oda Nobunaga, who was one of the first daimyos to make extensive use of firearms, rose to the forefront as a strong leader. Then, in 1543, there started to become more European traders and missionaries to Japan as they wanted to spread their influences to the natives. Then, in 1573, Oda Nobunaga had disposed of the last shogun of the Ashikaga shogunate, which then led for Toyotomi Hideyoshi to become master of Japan in 1590. Soon after, in 1603, the emperor had appointed Tokugawa Ieyasu shogun, which started the Tokugawa shogunate. And then a couple years later, in 1614, Christianity had officially become banned in Japan, for Japan wanted to keep its isolation. And finally,
Here are some of the changes and continuities that occurred over time in Tokugawa, Japan. So the first change was that classes stayed the same, but the power and effectiveness of each changed. And this was due in part because of the Tokugawa policies, which barred the samurai from participating in trade or farming. So that caused them to have an imbalance of power between them and the merchants, because once the merchants rose up and they were making a lot of money off of trade, it was hard for the samurais to get in on that and rise up, because they depended on stipends from the merchants, and it all depended on their rank and everything. So they never had a chance to move up in the world once that shifted. Another change was there was an increase in the production, trade, and population. Now the production increased because of new agricultural techniques. So there was a focus on new ways to fertilize the crops, and just new cropping techniques. So it allowed there for production to increase, and also because of the Tokugawa peace policies, which disarmed the religious communities and the local people, but it eventually put more people on the land, which allowed for the production to increase. And the population increased as a result of this because more people and more food. So food and people correlate. So the more food you have, the more people you're going to have, and also because of the better conditions in which they were working under allowed their population to flourish. And both of these influenced trade because agriculture was the basis for trade. So because when you have a lot of people and you have a lot of agricultural production going on, allows for urbanization and the growth of cities, which can influence trade because the merchants can base their businesses in the cities to have those big trading cities to trade with other people. Another change is the growth of cities, and that's because of the increase in the populations and the increase in the agricultural productions. And another change was the literacy and the spread of info increased and sped up. And this was needed because, of course, when you're trading with someone, you want to know everything about who you're trading with, so you're going to need to give them their info about your goods and everything, and that information needs to get around for trade to be successful. So when you require information, you need people who are going to be able to read and write so that they can understand the information and so they can pass out the information.
One continuity is with the Tokugawa policy, there's not a wide acceptance of religion and belief systems because, for example, in 1630, Tokugawa Iemitsu expelled Portuguese and Spanish converts and missionaries from the land because of the political threat. And that leads on to the next continuity, which is isolation. Japan isolated itself from Western influence and trade because in the 1790s, they fended off Russian forces from invasions. In the early 1800s, they fended off Britain, and they were worried in the 1840s that Americans would invade. So, in conclusion, with both continuities, the Tokugawa Japanese government focused on political stability and military instead of religion and culture.
This is Soapstone, and our document is called Limitation on the Propagation of Christianity. The subject is a set of rules that limit the spread and growth of Christianity in Japan. This was written in 1587 in Japan, and the occasion is limiting the power of Christianity in Japan. This notice was written for the citizens of Japan, and in some parts are specifically directed towards the vassals and daimyos. The purpose of this document is to prevent Christianity from gaining popularity in Japan, and also to help prevent vassals and daimyos from forcing people in their estates of land to become Christian. It was feared that the converts would give primary loyalty to their religion and that the converts would pose a political threat, so that is why official measures were taken in this document. The speaker is Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the shogun of Japan at the time. Hideyoshi wasn't very tolerant of Christianity, a major influence for why this was written. The tone of this document is respectful but also very firm and assertive. It is still respectful of Christianity but makes it very clear that Hideyoshi wants it to be contained.